So thank you for having me here tonight. I appreciate it. This is a bit of a charged presentation because climate change is a charged topic, and it's one that I get very passionate about. So I'll just do that little caveat that maybe some things I say get people a little worked up. So a little bit about ourselves, Blue Stem Natives. We are going into our third season. We are a women-owned business here in Norwell, growing exponentially in all ways every year. We now have a very large greenhouse on the property, so it looks nothing like this. This is from our very first season that we were open. And what we do is grow plants a lot differently than you may expect at a garden center. We grow strictly straight species, native to southeastern Massachusetts. We try to make as much ecologically friendly choices in our growing mediums and our pots and everything that we can. And so people come to us a lot saying, do you have this? Do you have that? And we're like, nope, it's not native here. And they get confused. But so we're pretty straight on the line about what's native in our area, and that's what we carry. My own personal story is I'm actually fairly new to the native plant world. Up till about 5 years ago, I was a dental assistant. I was a dental assistant for 18 years, got bored out of my mind and decided to go back to college. That whole midlife crisis kicked in hard. And I realized that my true love was in the science field. I wanted to be outside all the time. I wanted to be experiencing and living science. That's where my passion was. I joined I was a founding board member along with Britt for the South Shore Wild Ones chapter, first chapter in Massachusetts. And I heard Dr. Doug Tallamy speak about how no matter what we're doing for environmentally friendly practices, recycling, composting, whatever, it never feels like enough. But what we can do to do a very tangible change is to plant native plants. And if you haven't listened to any of Doug's presentations, I highly recommend you do. It was life-changing for me. I realized that this is what I want to do. This is what I want to teach people. And I just threw everything I have into it. So what's our deal today? We're going to talk about climate change, how it's affecting the world around us, as well as our own gardens, because it can be very frustrating and depressing to pour so much of ourselves, our time, our money, and our efforts into building our gardens only to have a record rain season followed by a record drought, and then everything's gone. So that can be very upsetting. So climate change, very simply put, brings about extreme weather in both directions. We're getting hotter summers, we're getting hotter winters. It's just not good, but things can very easily flip-flop. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. We get record rain, we get drought, record temperatures in both directions, and highly damaging storms. There are very few plants that are capable of handling all of that. That's a lot to ask from a little plant, right? And then there's the big picture. We want to look beyond our own spaces to help mitigate environmental challenges. What can we do? We got to do our part to try and help steer this ship around. But for our own sanity, we want to be able to set up our garden spaces for success, no matter what's coming down the pike. So our goals today are to try to make sustainable choices best we can, put in place good bones in our own spaces. We want to learn to cover all the contingencies possible. That's my favorite thing. I like to think about everything that could go wrong and try and figure out how to fix that. And then at the end, I'll teach some things, how to choose plants that will hopefully withstand any of the extremes that we come across. So what do we know? We know that the Earth's temperature is rapidly increasing. This is not a surprise to anyone. Greenhouse gases are the leading cause of the increase in temperature, and increased temperatures lead to extremes in weather, loss of species, and changes in food and weather availability. This is as of this afternoon, that climate clock that is ticking down constantly, left to the time that we have remaining to make massive changes in order to keep the global temperature down below 2 degrees Celsius. So how can we help do that? We want to be able to reduce our carbon footprint. We want to use our purchasing power to make better choices. And my favorite one is each one teach one, is a little philosophy that I'll get into in a few minutes. So reducing our carbon footprint, I remember coming home from school in the afternoons watching after school specials all about how our hairspray was going to make the hole in the ozone. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? The hole in the ozone layer is going to expand and swallow us all up. And Kenny Loggins was in the background singing. But this is not new to us. However, what we've chosen to do in these ensuing decades isn't working. We've put all of our eggs in the whole reduce, reuse, recycle basket. Emphasis on the recycle part didn't quite work out the way we had hoped. And I'll get into that more too. But there are things that we can do. And I do liken this to a bit of a mindset change. Switch back to the way our grandparents lived. Our grandparents bought things in bulk. They reused all those little plastic containers where you open the fridge and never quite know what's in there. Maybe label it better, but reusing what we have instead of buying new. Your dollar speaks volumes. There's so much that we can do that is sustainable, but it costs a lot of money. And as a seller, I'm telling you, if your ethos is to make environmentally friendly decisions, it costs money. The margins are very slim. So if you're interested in doing your part, you have to be willing to pay for it too. This is a big one for us. We want people to start thinking about where their products for their garden are coming from. And we have been conditioned to use peat in just about every garden product we have. We have peat pots. Peat is a main component of most of our garden soils. Unfortunately, it's also a very ecologically damaging product. So peat comes from peat bogs, and peat bogs are wetlands. Wetlands are environmentally one of the most prolific environment that we have. It supports all this wildlife. It's clean water. It filters everything. And so in order to get that peat, these wetlands have to be stripped and irreparably damaged. Peat is a carbon sink. It sequesters about 45% of all of the carbon in the world, and that's equivalent to all of the cars and household carbon emissions. I know, that's a lot. So every time we're stripping the land of this peat, we're releasing that carbon into the air, as well as is destroying these wetlands. And while there is plenty of peat, it's not going away anytime soon. That doesn't necessarily make it a renewable resource, because it can take up to 10 years to grow 1 centimeter of peat. So it's very slow. So we're doing a lot of damage. We're shipping it all over the world. Many of the peat bogs in Scotland and Ireland have been closed down because they've recognized how much damage is being done. And we're not getting that land back. That's going to take far beyond our lifetimes to come back. So we have some alternatives. Again, there's a cost to those things. Things like coconut coir is a great alternative. There is some debate about, shipping that around the world, but it is a byproduct of the coconut business. And also there's new paper-based products that are coming out that are starting to make their way. Again, you're going to pay more for these things because it costs more. There's not the infrastructure that's involved in that. That's what you should understand. It's not just a simple, there's lots of it, so let's use that. There's different avenues. This is a very familiar sight to any nursery owner. Everybody has these piles. We have this pile. It's awful. Plastic is ubiquitous in the nursery industry, and there's people that are trying really hard to change it. The problem with plastic is when we're trying to recycle plastic, people get very, oh, I recycle all my nursery pots. The problem is only about 7% of all plastic that you put in your recycle bin actually gets recycled. That's a dirty little secret, right? And that's why I've kind of fallen off the recycle bandwagon. It's almost not worth the effort to do it. So the other issue is black plastic. Black plastic is typically made up, it's an amalgamation of a bunch of different types of plastic. And so it's not easily recycled. And when it goes through the recycling plants, the code readers, they have little laser code readers, can't read the black plastic, the little numbers where it's the arrows with the number in it, they can't read it. So 99%, I'm just making that one up, most of the black plastic is taken out and sent right to a landfill. So the best thing that you can do is tell your beloved garden centers that you are interested in environmentally friendly plastic alternatives. Be willing to pay for it. That's a running theme that I have. Also, if your nursery does use recycled plastic, as we do, we have a recycled plastic container that we really love, wash it and bring it back to them. And that helps them be able to reuse it in an easy manner. There are a lot of other plastic alternatives, but for a quantity standpoint, they're best for a homeowner to use, like rice hull pots are great, and things like that. For the production side of things, nightmare. Like being able to afford all of those pots, move them, keep them, clean and pretty, just totally not, we're not there yet, right? So what you can do, bring your pots back, clean them. Don't just bring us back dirty pots, because if we have to clean them, that's taking time away from us growing the plants, right? So clean them, bring them back, and don't just bring back any pots you have, because most of us use very specific pots. So just bring back the ones that that particular nursery will take back. Ask them, and they'll tell you. Switching to manual and electric power equipment. I know it's sometimes more work if you're bringing out a rake instead of a leaf blower, but gas-powered lawn equipment is not regulated by anything. So there is a ton of pollution that occurs, not to mention oil and soil and hearing pollution because they're so loud. The carbon emissions from a gas-powered lawnmower over about an hour, if you run a gas-powered lawnmower for an hour, equates to driving a car for 100 miles. I know, I'm sorry. It's kind of mind-blowing. You don't even think about it. But there's been recent leaps and bounds in the electrical and battery-operated power equipment. We have an electric lawnmower, and it's great. We had to get an extra battery because we have a larger lawn, and so we had to do half our lawn and then switch the battery out, and that's fine. I also have an electric, a battery-operated chainsaw, and I cut up a pine tree that fell in my backyard. So it's not something that's just doing branches. I cut up a full pine tree. So the power is there, and didn't seem any more expensive to me than a gas-powered equipment. So those are the choices that we want to make, and it's a lot quieter. Like using a battery-powered chainsaw, I still use ear protection all the time, but it's so much quieter than a gas one. This is one of my favorites. I believe very firmly in this ethos is each one teach one. You do not have to be an expert in anything. I hate that term, expert. I don't feel like it should be used. But education is our greatest tool, and I feel very strongly that all of us have a gift to share with other people, no matter what that is. So learn a skill, teach it to others, whether that be vegetable gardening or composting or being a community education leader. Anything you can do to spread your knowledge to other people is going to make a world of difference. How much have you learned just in the past 10 minutes? Little facts that I've given you that you did not know before you came tonight. just simple little things that you can share with other people. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. So now that I've bummed everybody out with how sad and depressing it all is, we're going to switch to what we can do in our own properties, because that's the fun stuff. We're going to talk about garden infrastructure, building quality topsoil, permeable and semi-permeable surfaces, which is super important. That's something we don't really think about. Why drainage is important in building sustainable gardens, and finding and fixing different problems that are occurring in our landscape. This is one of the most important aspects of building a sustainable garden. Building and renewing quality topsoil drives me insane with the way we build houses and properties. Nowadays, they come to a lot, they clear cut the lot, they scrape all the topsoil off and dump it somewhere or sell it or do whatever they want. They build their structure, compacting everything that's in there, and then they pay money to bring in really crummy, rocky topsoil and fill the land. And they leave you with this crummy fill all over your yard, and then you have to go to Home Depot and buy bags of topsoil that has been scraped and cleaned up from who knows where and trucked over. It's just a giant mess. So we want to really focus on using what is already on our properties to build quality topsoil. Soil is a living being. There are billions of microbes in there. There's funguses that interact with each other. It is a living, breathing organism, essentially. And we want to treat it as such. We don't want to treat it as an inanimate object. We want to increase the organic matter in our soil, so that's leaf matter, trees, anything that's rotting, that's organic matter. And we want to increase gas and nutrient exchange, which means stop putting down landscape fabric. Stop doing it. Don't do it. There's so much that has to happen between the soil layers and the air above in order to create a healthy environment for plants. And when we put down those plastic wheat barriers that don't work anyway, we're inhibiting that. So this was one of my favorite facts that I learned recently. This is from the USDA, and it's made for U.S. cropland, but the same information still holds for us homeowners as well. 1% increase in organic matter on U.S. cropland could store the same amount of water that flows over Niagara Falls in 150 days. So that's nuts. So healthy soil acts like a sponge. It's able to hold on to water, maintain its porosity and maintain its volume, and then release it as it's needed. No-till is a very big thing that's happening. We've been used to like, oh, you got to till out your garden every year. And that's been found to actually destroy the garden soil structure. So if you can reduce that as much as possible when you're planting your flowers and your perennials and shrubs and trees, try to reduce the amount of soil disturbance you're doing. If you have lawn that you're trying to replace, instead of tilling it all up and grinding it up, you can take a shovel and kind of go underneath it, flip it over, keep that soil in place, and it'll degrade and add to that organic matter. So those are all very small little steps that you can take to help preserve that topsoil and build it. So just some main principles for managing the soil. Maximize the presence of living roots. So that means plant more plants. So that's one of my favorites. I like that one. Minimize disturbance. Like I just said, you don't want to till up a whole big garden plot. You want to work in smaller sections. Maximize soil cover. And that doesn't necessarily mean cover everything in mulch. It's quite the opposite, actually. We want you to use green living plants to cover soil. And maximize biodiversity. having too much of one thing is not good, right? We want to have as many different species in areas as possible. That's going to help us support more wildlife, more insect life, more bird life. It's going to invite all of that to our property, and it's going to help create healthier ecosystems overall. Solar and wind issues. When people come to me at the nursery, the very first thing, I usually get a story about their yard, which I love, but the very first thing I ask them when they're asking me what to plant is, what kind of sun and what kind of soil do you have? Those are the two most important things. If you have that information, you're good. When you're planting your garden, you really want to take the time to find your solar pattern. If you have areas that receive like just hard afternoon sun and just cooks, there are some things that you can do to help cool that area off, and plan for it. And then wind, same thing, that if you could have a lovely shady area with some soil moisture, but if you are kind of in a wind tunnel, that's drying out really quickly. So you have to kind of take that into consideration. So you can use plants to install windbreaks to help maintain a bit of that soil moisture, and then it gives you the privacy and the sound and sun protection as well. There are some apps that can help with solar charting. There's some iPhone and Android apps. Sunseeker is one. I haven't used that app. I prefer the website suncalc.org. But honestly, this is my favorite method if you have the time. I found this online and I think it's brilliant. You just break your yard up into a few different sections. You don't have to go out every hour on the hour, but go out and look and see what's going on and chart it down. And then that will really give you the best idea of how the sun is behaving with the vegetation that's already there, with the structures that are already in your yard, and you can make better choices with your plants. So you're not going to waste time and money and effort putting in plants when you thought you had shade garden and it really gets afternoon sun and you cook your plants. We also want to reduce our inputs, so reducing or eliminating herbicide and pesticides, regardless of the effect on insects. We already understand the effect on insects. I'm not going to go into that tonight, but there is a drastic effect on soil microbes. Many of the herbicides and pesticides subsist in the soil, which means they stick around, and not only are they damaging the insects that are in the area, but they're also damaging the mycorrhizae fungi that's in the soil. So we want to try to avoid that as much as we can. We want to reduce our watering input where we can, because we want to conserve that water. The past couple of years have shown us that clean water is not a given anymore, right? So we really need to get our act together. I drove by this morning, I almost pulled over and yelled because it had just finished raining and the guy had his sprinklers running, and I'm like, what? And half of it was on the sidewalk. I just couldn't. I was just keep going, Kristen. So we really need to be more intentional with that. And we also want to reduce our mowing and blowing culture.